3. 1 Samuel chapter number 3. Now recall we're looking at God's sovereignty. And the last couple times we've been looking at our attitude towards the sovereignty of God. And last time we saw where we're supposed to be completely obedient to whatever God's will is. This time I want you to see this. We're to have an attitude of entire resignation. An attitude of entire resignation. A true recognition of God's sovereignty will exclude all murmuring, complaining, etc. Now, think about that. Submitting to God's sovereignty means that we resign ourselves to whatever God's will and way is. And we're supposed to do that with a complete and entire resignation to that will, which means no backbiting or complaining or murmuring. And we see many examples of that in the Old Testament, in the Exodus of Israel, don't we? What was the most common saying about Israel during that time? And they murmured and complained about Moses and Aaron and God and food and water and everything else. Right, you brought us out to the desert. I would that we were back in Egypt eating onions and leeks and garlics. They wanted to go back and eat them ramps, didn't they? All right, so that was the opposite of what we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be submissive to God. It's natural for us to complain when we don't get the things that we want as men. It's natural for us, and we feel cheated if we aren't entitled to success. All right? When we don't get or keep these things, we are prone in our human hearts to cry out against God. But in one who has by grace recognized God's sovereignty must and will that it is God's perfect right to do with us as he wills. Now, how many would argue that point? It's God's perfect right as sovereign God to do with us as he would. All right? Now, who owns us? Who created us? Who made us in his image? God. And who is still in control and on the throne today? God. If God chooses to send poverty or sickness or domestic problems, even personal sickness, this heart should say, shall not the judge of all the earth do right? After times there will be a struggle in our minds. Why? Because we still have this carnal mind here. We still have this carnal flesh that wants to do as it would. There's always going to be a struggle about doing right. And there's always a struggle against doing wrong. There's always a struggle about that. But to those who have yielded themselves to this truth, there will soon be a peace that comes over us which says, thy will be done. Now, go to 1 Samuel chapter 3. I want you to go look at this verse, or this chapter as it were, and look at how that this high priest named Eli accepted God's will for what was going to happen. 1 Samuel chapter 3. And the child Samuel ministered unto the Lord before Eli, and the word of the Lord was precious in those days. There was no open vision. And it came to pass at that time when Eli was laid down in his place, and his eyes began to wax dim, that what? All right? What does that mean? They didn't have cataract surgery back then, did they? No. His cataracts were coming on, and he couldn't see. All right? It says, and ere the lamp of God went out in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was, and Samuel was laid down to sleep. He says, it got so bad to such a point that the light from the golden candlestick was going out. It wasn't supposed to go out. Okay? It was supposed to stay lit all the time. That it says that the Lord called Samuel, and he answered, here am I. And he ran unto Eli and said, here am I, for thou callest me. And he said, I called now, lie down again. And he went and laid down. So Samuel, being a young lad, he says, oh, he went to see Eli, and Eli said, wasn't me. Go lay down. All right? You know how we would be if somebody woke us up and said, I hear you. What you want? I don't want you. You go back to bed. I could just hear us fussing at him. All right? And the Lord called yet again Samuel. And Samuel arose and went to Eli and said, Here am I, for thou didst call me. And he answered, I called not, my son. Lie down again. Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, neither was the word of the Lord yet revealed unto him. And the Lord called Samuel again the third time. Number 3 here. What we always say? Third time's a charm, right? All right, what's what happens? And he rose and went to Eli and said, Here am I, for thou didst call me. Now look at this. Eli finally gets it. And Eli perceived that the Lord had called the child. All right, he's still a young child, okay? But he's ministering before the Lord. In other words, he's acting like a priest in the house of God. He's been raised in the temple, all right? Now, the Lord hasn't called him into service yet, but it's coming. Now, Eli finally recognizes that the Lord is talking to Samuel, okay? And he says, Therefore Eli said unto Samuel, Go lie down, and it shall be, if he call thee, that thou shalt say, Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth. So Samuel went and lay down in his place. And I guarantee he didn't sleep after that, did he? I guarantee he was laying down waiting for that call. And the Lord came and stood and called, as at other times, Samuel, Samuel. Then Samuel answered, Speak, for thy servant heareth. And the Lord said to Samuel, Behold, I will do a thing in Israel, at which both the ears of everyone that heareth it shall tingle. And what's that mean? Your ears are going to tingle. Something bad's coming. All right? And that day I will perform against Eli all things which I have spoken concerning his house. When I begin, I will also make an end. For I have told him that I will judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knoweth, because his sons made themselves vile, and what? Now, as a father, what are you supposed to do? Wow. Supervise your children. Restrain them. Withhold them from wickedness. And therefore I have sworn unto the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be purged with sacrifice nor offering forever. And Samuel lay unto the morning and opened the doors of the house of the Lord, and Samuel feared to show Eli the vision. All right, now this is pretty bad news, isn't it? Eli, you and your house are going to die. All right? You're going to die. Now, it's interesting to know why God doesn't tell us we're going to die. Why? What would we do? What would you do if God told you you're going to die tomorrow? It probably wouldn't be leaning on God, would it? Probably say, well, I guess I better go burn my candle on both ends, or whatever. We would tend, in our human nature, would tend to go out and party hardy and all that kind of stuff, that attitude. That's wrong. You see? Now, let's look at how Eli responds to this bad news. Eli has to pump it out of Samuel now. It said, And Samuel lay until the morning, opened the doors of the house of the Lord. Then Eli called Samuel and said, Samuel, my son. He answered, Here am I. And he said, What is the thing that the Lord has said unto thee? Okay? What did God tell you? What did God tell you? I pray thee, hide it not from me. God do so to thee, and more also, if thou hide anything from me, of all things that he said unto thee. He said, if you don't tell me, I'm going to pray God do it to you too. Okay, not that he could, not that he would, but he said he was threatening Samuel to tell him the truth. All right? And he said, what is this thing that the Lord has said unto thee? Verse 18, and Samuel told him every whit and hid nothing from him. Now I want you to see this verse. It said, look what it said, how Eli responds. And it says, and he said, it is who? All caps, right? It is Jehovah. Let him do what seemeth him good. Now think about this message. Here you've got two sons. As a father, how would you react to this prophecy? Right. You would respond with, well, let's petition God, and perchance he might change his mind. But Eli recognized the fact that who's in control? God. And if God says that I'm going to bring about this because of the wickedness, and because Eli failed to correct this wickedness, then I'm going to bring this about. We learn here how that God revealed to that Samuel that he was about to slay Eli and his sons for their wickedness, and that next Samuel communicated this to the aged priest. It was difficult even to conceive of more against the knowledge that the heart of a pious parent, and indeed a great trial to any father, that he would kill his two sons. In the power of their manhood, in the prime of their manhood, they would be cut off by divine judgment. You see how overwhelming this would be. But look at Eli's response again. And he said, "It is the Lord. Let him do what seemeth him good." And he didn't say anything else about it. So think about that. Look at Eli's response. Would it do any good to argue against God? If God has decided to do this, you can petition him and pray and ask for intercession, be an intercessor like Moses did for Israel. But Eli realized what? He had sinned. Eli realized that he had not rebuked his two sons and their conduct in the temple. Eli realized that he had sinned in not doing what he was supposed to do as a parent. He also realized that his two sons were wicked. So he could do nothing to stay this judgment. He could petition God, and we don't know that he didn't. But we don't see another word recorded about it until these things happen soon. Anybody remember how Eli's two sons got slain? Well, it's in the next chapter. Don't read ahead, but in the next chapter. Remember, the Philistines came out against them, and Eli's two sons decided, hey, let's go take the ark. If we take the ark, we're going to win. They're using it for like a lucky charm, right? A lucky token. Well, we got the ark. We're going to win. Well, here's the thing. Did God tell them to do that? Nope. What happened to those two boys? Slain. What happened to the ark? Carried off into captivity. Wasn't long it was coming back, sure. And it came back. Remember what happened? It said the Philistines figured out real quick after God destroyed Dagog, their god, chopped his hands and his head off, chopped him up into pieces. They said, this is too strong for us. We got to send it back. They said, if this is their god, then we'll know by the way these cows go. And what they do, they make gold mice and ephods and put them on that little cart, hooked up a cow that had a milk, that was a milk cow that had calves. And they said, if this cow goes on towards Israel, we'll know. So they followed it, and sure enough, calves went straight to Israel. And that convinced the Philistines that this was God punishing them for their sin of even having the ark. All right? But the two sons were slain and the ark was captured. And what happened to Eli when he got the news? He was sitting in a chair, which was not legal. All right? The high priest was to always be what? Standing and in the house of God. Here he was outside, sitting in a chair, all reared back. Well, you know how we do in chairs? We'll rear back and lean them against the wall like this. Well, what happened to him? He said he was so fat, boom, broke his neck when he fell. Okay, when he heard that noise, he fell back and broke his neck. So what happened? The very same day, his two sons died, and then he died just as God said. All right, so there's Eli. Now let's go to another one. Go to the book of Job. Just a few books away. Book of Job. And go to Job chapter 1. Now, this is kind of a different account. Job was not living a wicked life, was he? It doesn't say that he had wicked sons or daughters, does it? No. Matter of fact, it says that Job was praying for his sons and daughters. Job was a righteous man that eschewed evil. Look at Job 1:1. There was a man in the land of Uz. Now there's a name, isn't it? Where was Abraham from? Anybody remember? Right, Uz and Ur. Two different names, I tell you. Uz and Ur. So remember now, Job, this book was written before Moses. Okay, before Moses, about the time of Abraham, no doubt. So it was written, it is the first book of the Bible, but it's not Genesis, okay, about the creation. So here's Job now. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil. I had to look up that eschewed. Does that mean he chewed on evil? No. Right. He put it away from him. He declined to participate in. He removed it from himself. He would not have anything to do with evil. Now, that's a pretty good man, isn't it? But now remember, how do we look in God's sight? How's our righteousness? Right, as filthy rags. But look what it says. He was a perfect and upright man. In other words, he was doing his best to live a righteous life. He was praying, communicating with God. God was blessing him with him. He was keeping him sheltered and safe. He had the hedge around Job, didn't he? All right? But then here comes the devil, and here comes divine providence. Providence was smiling upon Job, was it not? He had sons and daughters. It said he had 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 she-asses, and a very great household, so that this man was the greatest of all the men of the East. And what's that mean? He's the richest man of all the East. Okay? In the whole country, he's the richest man. As a matter of fact, the whole territory, you would say, is the richest man. Now, why is that? Because God was blessing him. He was living in the right relationship with God, and God was blessing him. He was even so sensitive to his sons and daughters sinning while they were doing their annual get-togethers that he prayed ahead for them and said, hey, Lord, would you watch over them and keep them from harm? And if they offend you, Lord, I'm going to offer up this offering to keep it from being a problem. So he was praying ahead for his children. And then we switch scenes over to the throne room, verse 7. And the Lord said unto Satan, whence comest thou? Then answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro in the earth, and walking up and down in it. Now look where Satan's responsibility is. Where is it? Everywhere. Like if you picture a circle going this way, then picture one going this way. What does that mean? All over the place. The devil's not stuck in one spot. The devil's all over. Remember, he's a principality and power of the air. All right? Now, he doesn't go everywhere and do all the tricking. He's got demons to help him. But the devil does appear. And here he is now giving an account to God. And the Lord said unto Satan, hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil. Now, interesting how God presents Job. It's not Job bragging to God, is it? This is God. This is the I Am bragging on Job. That's why God was blessing him. And of course, then Satan says, oh, why don't you just let me have him for a little while, and he'll cuss you. He'll do something wrong. He'll sin against you, and on and on and on. But so you see that this man called Job was enjoying life. He was being blessed by God. Nothing was going wrong. I'm sure that he had daily problems like we all do, but major problems were not there. He was trying to live for God and was living for God. And then news arrived to Job, and one day he lost all of his children, lost all of his possessions. So notice what he says down in verse 21. Chapter 1, verse 21. It says, he bowed down to the ground and worshipped and said, naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. All right? And what's he saying? God blessed me, and God's still blessing me. Even though he took away everything I had, it was his to take. God's in control. Now, it's nice if we have things, but if those things are detracting us from God, what should happen? Put them away. Don't let things detract you from the service of God. But Job here now has an answer for these problems. And he says, Lord, the Lord gave them to me, and the Lord hath taken away. Now look what he says. Blessed be the name of the Lord. He says, I don't care what's happened, I'm still going to bless God. And we need to see that in the book of Job. We need to see it in our own lives. No matter what happens to us, what should we do? Bless the Lord. Why? Because it is his sovereign will to do as he pleases. What he's doing in our lives, according to Romans 8:28, is for our good. Let's just turn there. Hold your finger here, and we'll come back. Look over to Romans 8:28. Acts, and then Romans 8:28. We call this the golden chain of grace. Romans 8:28. I love this verse, and it's a good life verse for us. Look what it says, Romans 8:28. Look what it says, and we know. Now what's that mean? Right. This isn't something that we don't know. This isn't a mystery. This is what we know. Right? It's confirmed to us. And we know that all things, underline that, those two words, that all things, Romans 8:28, that all things work together, how? Underline that, for good. All things work together for good. To who, though? That's the question. Right, to them that love God, to them who are the called. Now look at the last phrase, according to what? His purpose. He's the one that calls. He's the one that saves, and he's the one that sends things and takes things from our lives. Now remember back in Job, Job has been receiving the good. And now that has been taken away from him. And he's just left with himself. God allowed the devil to take all that stuff away to prove to the devil and to prove to us that you don't have to have anything to worship God. As long as you've got God, you'll be all right. As long as God is with you, you're going to be okay. Why? For all things work for good. And that's a blessing if you can ever grab a hold of that verse and hang on to that for a life verse. Why? Knowing that when God is refining your gold, your soul, he's refining you not to hurt you, but rather to make it better. And when you refine gold, as we said this morning in Sunday school, you take and stoke up that fire hot, and that gold melts. And that's not an easy process. When it melts, though, is when it begins to get those impurities coming out and starts to bubble to the top. And then that goldsmith will take that little old sliding thing and skim that old dross off the top of it. And what's left after that gold is refined? A more valuable gold. Why? Because it's less impure. All right? And with God's gold, we can say it's perfect. When God gets done with us, we will be perfect. What's going to happen? Well, we know that from 1 Thessalonians 4, Jesus is coming back. And when he comes back, we're going to meet him in the air. And what's he going to do to us? What's going to happen before we meet him in the air? Right. He's going to change us in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. He's going to change us to a body that's perfect. We'll have a perfect mind, a perfect body, a sinless body, a perfect mind, and we'll have all of those things that come with that relationship with Jesus Christ in the clouds. We're going to go to live with him forever. We'll be perfect then and be able to understand things that we never could quite get a hold of. Why? We'll be using this thing at full capacity. Right now, what is it that we use of it? Like 30% or something like that? Somewhere around there. We're using like 30% of it. Well, God's going to let somewhere around there, 35, 30, something like that. But now, when we have a perfect body, we'll be using 100% capacity of our new brains. It has to be new. Why? Because the old one sure ain't working. Or mine isn't anyway. All right? So what I wanted to make this point about is that God allows these things into our lives, and sure, they're hard. It was definitely hard on Job. But what happened at the end of Job? What does it say? God blessed him tenfold, didn't he? He had everything back and plus. And then he even told Job, he said, Job, if you don't pray for these 4 guys, these helpers of yours, these so-called friends, you don't pray for them, I'll just take them on out. What did Job do? Go ahead, Lord, take them on. I'm tired of them too. No. Job was a righteous man, and he intervened for them. He interceded for them, offered up sacrifice for them, and God accepted the sacrifice. Now, don't you think those friends kind of changed their attitude a little bit? Now they owe Job their lives. Their very lives, they owe Job. Why? Because he intervened for them, interceded for them, and prayed God would forgive them. So here's Job. Now I want you to go to one more scripture verse, and we'll call it a day on this sermon. Look back to James chapter 4. James, right after Hebrews chapter 4. James, book of James, chapter number 4. Now, Job realized that God is the potter and we are the clay. Eli recognized the same thing. And here now I want you to see what James has to say, this New Testament, what James has to say in James chapter 4. Go down to verses 13, 14, and 15. James chapter 4, the last 5 verses. Verse 13 says, Go to now, ye that say, Today or tomorrow we will go into such a city and continue there a year and buy and sell and get gain. What are they saying? We got big plans, right? We're going to go over to this city and we're going to buy and sell more. We're going to make lots of money. That was their plan. And isn't that what men do? Oh, I'm going to go work for this person. They're going to make me lots of money or whatever. Okay? Watch what happens here. Verse 14. Whereas ye know not what shall be on the morrow. Now, what's that mean? What's going to happen tomorrow? Do you know? Why? We're not in control, are we? No. We think we are, but we're not. God's in control. For what is your life? It is even a vapor. Now, what's a vapor? Right. You get up this morning, you see a little bit of frost out there, and you see that steam coming up from that frost when the sunlight hits it. That's a vapor. Okay? Just a little wisp, and then it's gone. So even a vapor that appeareth for a little time, and then what? Vanisheth away. For that ye ought to say, now this is the lesson, what you should say, if the Lord will, what? We shall live and do this or that. You see, there's resignation to God's will. If the Lord will, we're going to do this or that. In other words, if it's God's will that we go and succeed in business, then we will. If it's not God's will, He'll make that plain too. He'll show us that we're on the wrong path. Verse 17, Therefore to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him what? All right? So we know that we're supposed to submit all things in our lives unto God. That's a good thing. That's submitting our lives to the will of God. What did Jesus do when he was there at the Garden of Gethsemane? I remember when he was praying at the... Right, he said, Nevertheless, not my will, but thy will be done. Now, what does that mean? Jesus knew that he had a terrible cross to bear, a terrible load. He was already starting to bear that load of sin for us there in the garden. And you see, as it were, that sweat as great drops of blood, it says, were coming out of every pore of his body. He was in such agony from that sin coming on him. And then he was led to that cross and there crucified, and that entire weight of sin was upon him. God's wrath was being poured out upon him, and it was our wrath that was there on him. And there he gave up his life for you and I. So you see, when we pray, remember how we're supposed to pray? Through the name of Christ. We submit our prayers according to the will of God. Not my will, but thy will be done. A person that has the right attitude, that understands God's sovereignty, that God's in control, will submit to God whatever happens in their lives. They won't murmur, backbite, or complain. Now that's a struggle, isn't it? When things are going good, we do pretty good. But man, when things get tough, well, we start going, we We get that old pooch mouth. Remember that? Put that old lip out there, and we put 10 roosters out there. It's so big, and we just growl at God. That's what Israel was doing. They were growling at God. It doesn't go good for them when they do that, does it? Matter of fact, it cost them 40 years in the wilderness for growling against God. They ate so much quail that they got stuffed with quail and sick of quail. Then they stopped complaining about that manna, didn't they, when they got that lesson about the quail. But here's the thing that we want to see. Our life must be in submission, complete submission to the Lord. We must accept that His will be in our lives and that we don't need to go against it or murmur against it. We need to accept it and say, not my will, Lord, but thy will be done. God will never do anything to us that is designed to hurt us and destroy us. God will always do something that is to make us better, to make us draw closer to Christ in these last days. So when you think about that, let's learn to control our lips a little better. Right? What does James say about those lips? He said, "For the tongue that kindleth a big fire," doesn't it? It's like the helm of a ship. You can take that rudder and turn a great big huge ship with that little bitty rudder. And that's what a tongue does. It can start a great matter, a great fire with it. Let's quit complaining. Stick that tongue back in there, put them lips back up, and accept that God's will is being done in your life, and ask God to help you to do better. Ask God to help you live according to His will and according to His way. All right, we'll stop there. Let's all stand. Lord willing, we come back tonight and be looking at Nehemiah. Let's close.